Welcome to the FAA's informal airspace meeting on the proposed modification of Class C airspace surrounding Nashville International Airport. We're glad you could join us for this virtual meeting event. I'm Matt Felton, the FAA's moderator for today's meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to solicit comments on the proposal's effect on local air traffic operations. Please note that the proposed modification would not affect the number of aircraft in the area and would not change the flight paths or altitudes at which aircraft operate. Instead, these modifications are designed to increase the area in which air traffic control, or ATC, communicates with aircraft operating within the Nashville airspace. As a result, the proposed modification will increase safety and reduce the risk of conflicts between aircraft for every pilot and during all operations. Here is our agenda. The meeting will start with the FAA's detailed presentation of the proposed Nashville airspace, followed by presentations and comments from the attendees who registered in advance to speak. Afterwards, our panel of experts will host a 60-minute question and answer session, during which any attendee attending via Zoom or on social media may submit a written question. Finally, we will adjourn this presentation with brief closing remarks. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, your microphones are muted and cameras are off. To submit a question during the Q&A session, please enter your written question in the Q&A tab on the Zoom platform. If you are attending this meeting via a social media channel, please click on the Q&A link in the comments section to be directed to our Google form. If you're having technical issues connecting to the virtual meeting, you can text our technical support team anytime during the workshop at 949-478-0253. This phone number is for text messages only. The FAA will be collecting comments on this proposal. We encourage you to send your comments. Please note, submitting a question during the Q&A session is not the same as providing a formal written comment. To do so, you may mail them to the FAA at 1701 Columbia Avenue, College Park, Georgia 30337, or via email to the address shown on the screen. Please include Nashville Class C in the subject line. Please provide your comments by Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022. You can also visit our website at www.faa.gov/go/Nash for more information about the project.
Hi, I'm Chad Joins, the Airspace Plans and Procedures Specialist and Air Traffic Controller in the Nashville Air Traffic Control Tower. The next few slides provide a basic overview of the Nashville Airport and surrounding airspace. Nashville International Airport, originally built in 1937, is a major commercial airport located 6 miles from downtown Nashville. Air traffic at the airport was already on the rise before the pandemic and is now exceeding pre-pandemic levels. Today, the airport serves 80 nonstop destinations and has over 260 daily departures. Also of note, the airport recently expanded and is continuing to expand its passenger terminal to include additional gates. The runways at Nashville International Airport were built to align with the prevailing wind direction in the area. To operate safely, aircraft typically take off and land into the wind. You will see numbers on the runway, and those numbers indicate the compass heading the aircraft is facing as it lands or takes off. For example, at Nashville, you will see runway 2 right/20 left, which is 20 degrees in one direction and 200 degrees in the other direction. Parallel runways that have the same compass headings carry the designation L for left, R for right, or C for center to distinguish them. At Nashville, there are 3 parallel runways: left, right, and center, and a 4th crossing runway named Runway 13/31. The selection of the runway in use is managed by FAA or Air Traffic Control and is dependent on wind direction and other operational factors. In addition to Nashville International Airport, there are numerous smaller airports in the vicinity. These airports include John C. Toone, which is one of the busiest general aviation airports in Tennessee, and has a new air traffic control tower, which opened in 2021. Smyrna and Murfreesboro are also busy nearby airports that are used mostly by general aviation. There are also numerous medical helicopters and flight schools that operate throughout the airspace. The FAA directs traffic through 3-dimensional airspace, which is divided into airspace classes. The 4 primary categories of airspace are controlled, uncontrolled, special use, and other. Controlled airspace include classes Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo. For our purposes today, we'll focus on Class Charlie and Class Delta. Class Charlie airspace can be modified to fit the needs of each airport. It is a segmented circle that typically extends from the surface to 4,000 feet above the airport's ground elevation. Lateral boundaries are up to 5 nautical miles surrounding the airport at the surface and up to 10 nautical miles at the outer rings. Radio communication with air traffic control must be established prior to entering this airspace. Class Delta airspace can also be modified to fit the needs of an airport. It is a cylinder centered around an airport that extends from the surface up to 2,500 feet above the airport elevation. Lateral boundaries are unique and can be adjusted for each airport and their arrival and departure procedures. The following slides present graphics depicting the current and proposed Nashville airspace. The FAA has studied this issue extensively, and the following graphics are a result of detailed work to design the proposed airspace. This graphic shows the current airspace chart for Nashville International, which is Class Charlie, depicted by a solid garnet line, along with John C. Toone Airport and the Smyrna Rutherford County Airport, which has Class Delta airspaces, and are depicted by a dashed blue line. The current Class Charlie airspace for Nashville has an airspace ceiling of 4,600 feet, mean sea level, or MSL. The floor of the airspace varies. It starts at the ground surface close to the airport, and further out, it starts between 2,100 feet and 2,400 feet MSL. The current Class Delta airspaces for John C. Toone and Smyrna each start at the surface and go up to 2,500 feet. This chart shows the proposed Class Charlie airspace at Nashville in magenta outlines. It also shows the proposed altitude change to the airspace at John C. Toone, which will create a clear delineation between Class Delta and Class Charlie airspaces. The proposed airspace floor and ceiling altitudes are shown in magenta. In the typical style of a terminal area chart, where altitudes are in hundreds of feet and SFC representing surface. This proposed airspace change includes changing the floor and ceiling altitudes of the existing Class Charlie airspace. The ceiling is proposed to be 6,000 feet MSL, and each segment will have a different floor altitude. The Class Charlie airspace excludes the Class Delta airspace for John C. Toone and excludes most of the Class Delta airspace for Smyrna. The airspace ceiling for John Toone changes with the proposed design. There is 1 inner ring and 4 outer ring segments. We will review each of these segments starting with the inner ring and going in a clockwise direction for the outer ring segments. Starting at the inner segment called Area A, this graphic shows the proposed changes to the airspace. First, the inner circle would increase from 5 nautical mile ring to 7 nautical miles, excluding the downtown Nashville area. Second, the airspace ceiling would increase from 4,600 feet MSL to 6,000 feet MSL. The airspace still starts at the ground surface as its floor. Of note, this section excludes the portion of the Nashville Class Charlie that overlays the Smyrna Class Delta In that area, Smyrna class Delta airspace will have hierarchy over Nashville class Charlie airspace. So why are we making these changes? As shown on this graphic, aircraft landing in a south flow that are on final approach to Nashville cross the Opry and Judd final approach waypoints at 2,000 feet MSL. The proposed change protects these final approach fixes by keeping the arrival traffic separated from other air traffic in the area. Also of note, this design maintains the cutout on the western portion of Area A for primarily medical helicopters and downtown airspace activities. That is the reason for the cutout piece of the cylinder on the left side of the graphic, as opposed to Area A being a simple cylinder shape. Another reason for making Area A changes is for aircraft on final approach in north flow. Aircraft cross the final approach waypoints Dobbs, Garth, and Skaggs at 2,500 feet MSL. This proposal protects these final approach fixes by keeping the arrival traffic separated from other aircraft in the area. Next, this graphic shows the northern portion of the outer ring, called Area B. Compared to existing Class Charlie airspace, this area would increase in radius from 10 nautical miles to 15 nautical miles. And it is proposed to have the floor lowered to 1,800 feet MSL and the airspace ceiling raised to 6,000 feet MSL. In the following slides, we'll discuss the reasons for these changes. We'll introduce a few terms in the discussion, including IFR, which means Instrument Flight Rules, VFR, which means Visual Flight Rules, and STARS, Standard Terminal Arrival Routes, or more simply, Arrival Procedures. Why were these changes made in Area B? For aircraft arriving to Nashville in South Flow, this change was made to increase separation between IFR and non-participating VFR aircraft. A non-participating VFR aircraft is an aircraft that is not receiving air traffic control services. VFR refers to an aircraft being flown visually, and pilots generally do not communicate with air traffic control unless required. Such traffic typically operates at or below 5,500 feet MSL in the Nashville airspace. Aircraft on an instrument approach for runway 20 left cross the Reba waypoint at 5,000 feet MSL, then descend for the Judd waypoint. The dimensions of the Area B airspace were designed to contain this arrival traffic within the Class Charlie airspace. The proposed Area B is also designed to address arrival procedures, shown in orange, for aircraft landing in North Flow. The airspace ceiling was increased to 6,000 feet MSL to enhance separation between IFR aircraft using these stars and non-participating VFR aircraft. This graphic shows the eastern outer ring called Area C. This area has an airspace ceiling increased to 6,000 feet MSL. Of note, the floor would be 2,100 feet MSL. However, this excludes the Class Delta airspace for Smyrna lying underneath. In addition, the outer radius increases from 10 to 15 nautical miles, just like Area B. Why are these changes proposed for Area C east of Nashville International? This graphic shows the star used by aircraft landing to the south, crossing waypoints from Breath to Hackham at or above 6,000 feet MSL, which is also above this area of airspace. However, this will also increase separation between non-participating VFR aircraft and eastbound departures off Nashville during their climb out. This graphic shows the star, called Paisley, used by aircraft landing to the north at Nashville International. Again, the airspace is designed to enhance separation of this arriving traffic at or below 6,000 feet MSL from non-participating VFR aircraft in the area and eastbound departures off Nashville. This graphic shows the southern portion of the outer ring called Area D, which is proposed to have the floor lowered to 1,800 feet MSL. The outer radius increases from 10 to 15 nautical miles. As with the rest of the outer ring, the airspace ceiling increases to 6,000 feet MSL. Why are changes proposed for Area D? This graphic shows the final approach course and star arrival procedure for north flow arrivals to Nashville International. The airspace floor is proposed to be 1,800 feet MSL to increase the separation of this arrival traffic from non-participating VFR traffic in the area. As aircraft enter Area D, they are already at 4,000 feet MSL from the west, or descending below 6,000 feet MSL from the east. Finally, this graphic shows the western ring of the proposed airspace, called Area E. The western ring is proposed to keep the floor of the segment at 2,400 feet MSL. This airspace overlies John C. Toon Airport, which has Class Delta airspace up to but not including 2,400 feet MSL. The outer radius increases from 10 to 15 nautical miles, and the airspace ceiling increases to an altitude of 6,000 feet MSL. Why are these changes proposed for Area E? The western ring was designed to increase separation between IFR aircraft arriving to and departing from Nashville and non-participating VFR aircraft. The higher ceiling would enhance the area of separation. Aircraft landing in south flow into Nashville International would cross the waypoints shown in the graphic at or above 5,000 feet MSL. For aircraft landing in north flow at Nashville International, the airspace ceiling was designed to enhance the area of separation between aircraft arriving to or departing from Nashville and other non-participating VFR aircraft in the vicinity. Similar to the south arrivals, arriving aircraft would cross the waypoints shown in the graphic at or above 5,000 feet MSL. This graphic shows the proposed airspace redesign for Nashville and the surrounding airports in south flow. Aircraft arrive on stars from the four general directions. Aircraft in south flow are approaching the airport from the north to land on runway 20 left, 20 center, or 20 right. The standard terminal arrival routes are in orange, and a sample of actual historical flight tracks is shown in blue. These tracks give an indication of where aircraft landing at Nashville International typically fly, coming in from each direction along the stars and then following air traffic control instructions to join the final approach course and land on each runway. Similar to the previous slide, this graphic shows the proposed airspace redesign for Nashville and the surrounding airports in north flow. Aircraft arrive on stars from four general directions. Aircraft in north flow are approaching the airport from the south to land on runway 2 left, 2 center, or 2 right. The standard terminal arrival routes are in orange, and a sample of actual historical flight tracks is shown in blue. These tracks give an indication of where aircraft landing at Nashville International typically fly. The last graphic shows the same proposed Class Charlie airspace zoomed farther out, with satellite procedures shown in green for the surrounding airports. The satellite procedures are called RNAV, which stands for Area Navigation. These procedures are used at smaller airports located outside of the Class Charlie and Delta airspaces. As shown, these procedures are mainly located outside of the extents of the proposed Class Charlie and Class Delta airspaces.
Hi, I'm Chuck Armstead, an Environmental Protection Specialist with the FAA. In the following slides, I'll discuss the FAA's rulemaking and environmental review processes. Any changes to Class C airspace must go through the rulemaking process. Rulemaking is the process federal agencies use to make new regulations. Any proposed rule goes through numerous reviews, and the public has the opportunity to review and comment on the proposed rule. The FAA is required to review and consider every comment. Once the agency has read and considered all comments, it decides whether to go ahead with the final rule. The agency may adopt a final rule that is identical or similar to the initial proposal, or it might make changes based on the comments. As shown on the slide, this informal airspace meeting is an integral part of the process that comes before the notice of proposed rulemaking. Before any changes can be made, the proposed rule must go through an environmental review, which is required by the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. NEPA requires that the agency evaluate environmental and related social and economic effects of the proposed action. The review includes a preliminary technical review, a preliminary environmental review, an internal review, and choice of appropriate NEPA review, which could include extraordinary circumstances and significant impacts. The graph on this slide depicts the FAA's general NEPA process for all projects. It is not specific to this project, but it will be applied to this project.
Thank you, Chad and Chuck. We're just about to begin the live portion of the meeting and the Q&A session with the expert panel. First, here is a summary of the next steps in the process. Comments will be accepted until March 22nd, 2022. The FAA will consolidate and review comments. The FAA will consider comments and incorporate pertinent modifications. The FAA will finalize the environmental review, and once the notice of proposed rulemaking has been published in the Federal Register, there will be a separate 60-day period. We encourage you to send your comments. You may do so by addressing them to the FAA via mail or via email to the address shown on the screen. Please include Nashville Class C in the subject line. Please make your comments no later than Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022. You can also visit our website at www.faa.gov/go/Nash for more information about the project. Today's meeting is being recorded and will be available on the FAA's website for future viewing. Good evening and welcome to the live portion of tonight's meeting. We are just about to get started, but before we do, I have a few formalities to go over. I'm Matt Felton, the Community Engagement Officer for the FAA Southern Region, and I will be your moderator this evening. We are holding this virtual public meeting to inform you, the community, about the FAA's proposal to modify the airspace over Nashville International Airport. The FAA considers making a change like this for safety. The plan will not change existing flight paths or altitudes that aircraft currently fly, and it will not be the cause of more flights over the area. For tonight's meeting, we have local air traffic controllers, environmental and flight standards specialists here to answer your questions. The live Q&A session with our panelists will begin in just a few minutes. But first, if you pre-registered via Zoom to make a presentation, your name will be called during this part of the meeting. Each presentation will be limited to 3 minutes. We will unmute each person when it is their turn to speak. Any use of inappropriate language will result in you being placed back on mute immediately. This meeting will not be adjourned until everyone on the list has had an opportunity to address the panel. This meeting may be adjourned at any time if all persons present have had an opportunity to speak. Our first presentation for tonight is from Jim McClay. Jim, welcome. You have 3 minutes to speak. You may begin your presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Like you said, my name is Jim McClay. I'm the Director for Airspace, Air Traffic, and Security with the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. So thanks for letting me be a part of the meeting this evening. So when we were made aware of this proposed airspace change, we actually ran a survey of our local members there in Nashville. We reached out to about 800 of them, got about 130 responses, ran the survey in January into early February. Just wanted to share a little bit what we found from our responses. Amongst respondents who operate frequently in the Nashville area, that would be either daily, weekly, or monthly, Just wanted to give you some context. About 65% of the respondents, based on what they knew at the time, did not feel that the Class C needed to be modified, with about 12% in favor of it. About 44% felt that it would impact their ability to access the airspace or underlying airports, compared with about 39%. So just a little bit of context there. Notably, about 53%, so over half, were not aware of the proposal before taking our survey back in January. This was something that was concerning to us, and we just wanted to, we feel that FAA needs to do some further pilot outreach to the local community beyond this evening's meeting, with over half of the folks not being aware of what the proposal was. Next, there were multiple comments about Nashville's approach being very busy. And so we did want to emphasize that we feel staffing levels need to be examined to ensure that they're sufficient to support the expected increase in GA flights requesting clearance through the Class C. Next, we also wanted to ensure that ADS-B letters of agreement would be readily available from the facility. There are a number of non-ADS-B equipped aircraft in the area that are going to need to be accommodated. We have had issues in other areas of the country where these LOAs are not readily available. So that's something that we'd like to see addressed here proactively. And then finally, we wanted to just address the floor over on the east side of the proposal. We feel that I forget which area it was in the presentation, but over on the east side, we feel that should feet to 2,400 feet. To match what's over on the west. We feel that 2,400 feet should allow a sufficient buffer to prevent resolution advisories, looking at the altitudes at both Nashville and Smyrna on the approaches. It's important. Most pilots don't fly right up to the floor, but usually employ their own buffer. This is something we discovered in dealing with Chicago Midway's Class C a few months ago. And finally, we just feel that would also provide some consistency in the floors, making it easier for pilots. So. That's all I have to share, and I think my time is up. So thanks again for the opportunity to comment, and please feel free to reach out with questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jim. Our next presentation is from Carl Richcreek. Carl, welcome. You have 3 minutes to speak. You may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Matt. My name is Carl Richcreek. I've got over 24,000 hours of military and commercial flight experience. I've been a United pilot for 29 years, 22 of those as a captain. I'm a former naval aviator flying F-18s and A-4s. I built and currently fly a Vans RV-8. With regards to the proposed changes to the Class C airspace around Nashville, I respectfully request consideration to rest the eastern Area C lower sector altitude from 2,100 feet to 2,400 feet, just like the proposed lower altitude on the western sector of Nashville. And the same thing as Jim McClay just mentioned. I currently own and operate TK Farm Airport. It's TN26. It's just under the, it would be directly underneath your proposed expanded Class C airspace, and as such will be directly impacted by that lower limit altitude. 3 safety enhancements would be gained by raising the lower limit altitude. Number 1, in case of engine failure while departing or arriving runway 1836 at Tennessee 26, raising that lower altitude 300 feet could potentially provide an extra mile of gliding distance to reach a safe landing zone and exponentially raise operational safety. Number 2, raising the lower limit would also reduce TCAS events when departing from Tennessee 26 that would unnecessarily cause overhead traffic to respond to TCAS RA. 1,500-foot climb in less than a minute is what my airplane can perform. So obviously that would be an RA situation right there. Number 3, there's also 2 radio towers that are 1,449 feet on a direct path between Lebanon and Smyrna. Extensive flight training traffic, as you know, exists between the 2 airfields. Flight clearance would be 650 feet if the lower altitude is not increased. No modification to current arrivals or instrument approaches to Nashville or Smyrna would be required by raising the altitude to 2,400 feet. All altitudes for the SIDS, STARS, approaches, missed approaches in the eastern sector, Area C, are already at 3,000 feet and above. I thank you in advance for your consideration raising that lower altitude on the eastern sector of the proposed Nashville Class C airspace. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Carl. Our final presentation for tonight is from Dean Selby. Dean, welcome. You have 3 minutes to speak. We'll give it just a moment for it to reset the clock there. There we go. You have 3 minutes to speak. You may begin your presentation.
All right, well, I'm Dean Selby. I'm the airport manager at Upper Cumberland Regional Airport, which is about 55 miles, I believe, east of Nashville. And I've had several flight crews approach me with a couple of concerns, and that especially in IFR traffic, being where we are the longest airport, longest runway east of Nashville, that's with it before you get way east, and with an instrument approach, ILSs and 2 WAS approaches, we get a lot of IFR traffic already that sometimes diversions from Nashville, but primarily I'm thinking IFR traffic. And there's no communication and no radar coverage once an aircraft begins an approach into Upper Cumberland Regional. Memphis knows this. I'm on a first name basis with their controllers. At least we average 4 times a week that one of their controllers has an aircraft that has missed check-in more than 15 minutes on the approach. The concern that the 135 and 91 operators, including the medical helicopter operators in their area, have approached me with is that by increasing the airspace, the intimidation factor, it will drive more of that IFR traffic toward us and create this into an even more critical situation where it's 15 minutes from the time they release it, another 15 minutes before they do it, before we actually send out search and rescue. And we're holding aircraft for as much as 30 minutes on the ground, just waiting for an approach because they can't talk to them or see them on radar once they clear them. And the concern from all the operators is just that it will drive more traffic here and create that into an even more unmanageable situation. And I would like to make sure that that is thought of how much it's going to affect the traffic for the surrounding airports. Like I said, just from the intimidation factor and the increase already that they've had, that when you start messing with the airspace like this, it may push that traffic even further out. And I'd just like for that to be considered, that we add another sector frequency or something from Memphis out to the east to fix this before someone gets killed out here already. And this just may make it even worse. And I just hope that we consider that and think about that. And I think several of my 135 and 91 operators are going to respond and ask that be addressed. But that's all I wanted to say, is make sure we're thinking about that, because I've been approached with that. So I promised I would bring it up. So there it is. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you, Dean. So that concludes presentations for this meeting. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists for the evening. We have members from Nashville Air Traffic Control on our panel today: Marie Stewart, Chris Williams, and Will Mitchell. We have Chuck Armstead, an environmental protection specialist for the FAA, and Don Williams from the Nashville Flight Standards District Office. Thank you, everyone, for joining. For your participation in the meeting, if you registered on the Zoom platform, please submit your questions on the Q&A tab. If you are watching on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, please submit your questions in the platform's chat area. Please keep in mind that questions asked during the webinar are not part of the official record for the Nashville Informal Airspace Workshop. To submit an official comment that becomes part of the public record, please use the link on the provided comments page of the website. If you are having technical issues, you can send a text message to the following phone number: 949-478-0253. And now to begin the Q&A portion, I'll read questions aloud and we'll give the panelists an opportunity to discuss. So we'll see our first question. The first question is rather straightforward: why do we need this airspace change? So I'll kind of look towards Marie and Chris, if we can discuss that.
Chris, I'll start. This change is driven by a comprehensive look at safety incidents that have occurred near Nashville due to VFR aircraft in close proximity to turbojet aircraft landing and departing Nashville. It's been on the rise with the increased volume and complexity. Chris, what do you have to add to this?
Basically, this is just pushing non-participating VFR aircraft farther away from our airspace. If you choose to, stay closer to Nashville, if you're transitioning, for example, from John Tune to Smyrna or John Tune to Lebanon or any of the East airports, it allows us to kind of force you, if you want to stay close, to talk to us so we can provide services. We know exactly where you're at, what kind of altitude you're at. We can manipulate your heading as needed to kind of miss traffic on final or other traffic departing the airport. But the main purpose of the expansion is just to provide an additional boundary of safety between our participating IFR and non-participating VFR.
Thank you. So our next question, kind of a question on equipment requirements and for aircraft utilizing the airspace. How does this airspace change affect the requirements for aircraft to be equipped with transponders and ADS-B? Chris, I guess, could you speak on that a little bit?
Sure. Transponder and ADS-B requirements won't change. However, the lateral requirement for ADS-B will, because our shelf for Class C will be pushed out to 15 miles. So the 10,000, when you fly above Class Charlie, the 10,000 requirement is the same as long as you're within the lateral boundaries, but our lateral boundaries will be just slightly bigger. So the only change will be the radius from Nashville, which you're supposed to have the transponder and the ADS-B. That's a pretty easy question.
Thank you, Chris. So just the radius increasing there will affect the transponder requirements. I guess our next question, is the FAA conducting an environmental review to comply with National Environmental Policy Act? An environmental question, so I'll kind of look to Chuck if you can speak on what aspects the FAA is doing environmentally.
Yes, sir. With this action and all airspace action, the FAA does conduct an environmental review to comply with NEPA. We will take the input from the community, and we value that as we conduct our environmental process review. There are a lot of things that we look at, and we provide that information, what we find, changes we try to make to mitigate whatever issues may come up as well. Like I said, taking in account the public's concerns. So yes, our process dictates that we review all airspace actions per NEPA requirements. We take the community's input, and I make sure that I input that into all of our reviews of all airspace actions.
Thanks, Chuck. So our next question, actually very straightforward and probably one I was kind of expecting from the get-go. Will I see aircraft flying new routes that have not typically flown in the past? So obviously, people are going to be concerned. Are they going to start seeing aircraft flying over areas that they're not used to seeing? I'll look, I guess, Chris or anybody, if you can speak on this.
Sure, absolutely. The simple answer is, if you're IFR, absolutely not. We have no intent on changing the flight path of our existing commercial or Part 135, Part 91 operators into the airport. There would be no purpose in that. It would actually cause more harm than good. At least on the controller side, we'd have to learn something new, and we're always against that. But for VFR, what you may see is if VFR non-participating aircraft, people that don't want to call Nashville will tend to have to go wider around the airspace. So you may see some people, flying over your house that aren't normally there, and they're probably just transitioning wider, staying clear of that 15-mile arc if they actually don't want to talk to us. But the short answer is no, you should not see a change in flight path, especially from our common operators in the airspace.
So there's no change in the flight path. One concern, and this kind of goes into the next question. What is the penalty for violating Class C airspace? Will the FAA allow a one-time deviation? I kind of look towards Don or Marie, if you can speak on this and kind of the concerns that pilots might have on violations of Class C airspace.
From an air traffic standpoint, I'll start. There's no change to how airspace violations are handled. Air traffic, we usually issue brasher warnings if we feel an airspace violation has occurred. But how potential violations are handled is addressed by the Flight Standards District Office. So I'll kind of hand this off to Don now.
Thank you, Marie. Hello, everyone. When a brass is issued, pilot deviation occurred. And typically the office, we will review the information. We will listen to the video recordings and we'll look at the radar track. And then we'll reach out to the air crew. Particularly, we want to speak with the pilot in command. Our purpose is to open up transparent communications because we simply want to understand from the pilot's perspective of what led up to the event taking place. And then we pick a course of action. Sometimes it's counseling, sometimes it's just training. And then, we know that all pilots are trained to operate in the national airspace. So really hoping that we don't have a whole lot of violations. Matt?
No, thanks, Don. So, I mean, I key takeaway from what I'm hearing there, the flight standards office, district office, you'll be having that open communication. You'll be talking with the pilots, you'll be working with them,
That's correct. We'll work with them.
Thanks. So our next question, with this modification in Nashville, will radar traffic advisories be easier to pick up for VFR flights? So again, it's kind of going back to the operators and pilots out there. I'll kind of look, maybe Chris, if you can speak on that.
It depends on how busy the controller is, and that's always the way it's been. As it exists now, if you've ever talked to ATC or listened on 118.4, which is the east side radar frequency, you notice your ability to get flight following or transition to a different airport within our airspace is wholly contingent upon how busy the controller is. So this will not change your difficulty in getting flight following. It'll pretty much stay the same. It's always dependent on how busy the controller is. We do have a satellite sector that we recently opened this last year, and we're hoping that as we open that more, that will allow aircraft at 4,000 feet below to pick up flight following fairly easy, as the workload will be split between two people, rather than it just be kind of stuck on one person as it is right now.
So, with it be, if it can be split between two people, you can actually see a little bit of improvement. So it might be a little easier for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Workload is split, and it makes it a lot easier to focus on the aircraft that are lower altitudes. Looking for if they're doing photo work or if they're just flying around and want advisories for traffic in the area. We get a lot of flight following from local flight schools with instructors that just want the extra buffer of, they're teaching a student and trying not to, have an accident themselves at the same time while they're instructing. And it's often hard to look out the window and see traffic around you or keep a situational awareness without talking to us. We enjoy providing that service. And as long as we have the manpower and the ability to do that, we will.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. So our next question, speaking from an air carrier's point of view, how will these proposed changes impact Part 121 air carriers? I guess, Will, can you speak maybe on how 121 operators might actually be impacted by this?
Sure, Matt, thanks. The Part 121 carriers, which are the scheduled air carriers here in Nashville, won't see any changes at all. The IFR traffic, for the most part, won't see any changes at all. As a matter of fact, which Chris hit on it multiple times, the big thing is the non-participating VFR traffic, which we're trying to limit. We want to talk to those airplanes. I mean, it's not a necessity, but we would like to make sure we can limit the conflictions. He talked about the frequency congestion in 18.4. It is a problem, but we'd rather talk to the airplanes versus not talking to them so we can take care of the confliction. But long story short, it will not affect the Part 121 air carriers in Nashville.
Thank you, Will. For our next question, one specific to John C. Toon. Will John C. Toon Airport Tower equipment be expanded to create better communication with Nashville as part of this plan? I feel it's greatly needed from the pilot's perspective. We'll start off just Maria, if you can speak on this, if there's been any conversation about the tower equipment.
Sure, Matt. So I know John Toon Tower is trying to get more equipment, but as part of this project, there are no changes planned for John Toon in conjunction with the Class C proposal.
So yeah, I mean, basically for what we're discussing tonight is just on the Class C modification. We can't really speak on anything for equipment in the towers. Thank you. So our next question, why can't the FAA leave operations the way they are now? I mean, I guess almost everyone could probably speak on this. Marie, Chris, Will, anyone, if you want to speak to this.
Either of y'all want to go? All right, well, I'll jump into it, I guess. So the simple answer is it's sheer number of aircraft flying within Nashville's airspace. If you think, and I know you can't see it on any maps, but we encompass about a 40-mile circle around Nashville. So the bulk of our traffic, both IFR and VFR, happens within about 20 to 25 miles. So as we go up, in traffic every single month, our count's been pretty steady for the last couple of years. That's more users in the airspace in a limited area. So something has to be done to separate, the ones that are receiving IFR services. If you've ever flown a jet into Murfreesboro, you pretty much know what I mean. Murfreesboro can have 13 people in the pattern at one time, all squawking 1200, and here comes a jet that's doing 2 or 3 times their speed. And sometimes we have to move the aircraft 3 or 4 times to get into that airport. And that's, that tends to happen not just at Murfreesboro, but on the east side of Nashville, where a lot of the flight training happens, the east practice area towards the racetrack or out towards Lebanon. So if we have the ability to push this airspace out, and if somebody wants to operate in that area, they can talk to us. That will allow us to even better, separate those aircraft. It kind of moves everybody out a little bit and provides a better buffer so we can run some of these faster moving aircraft into Smyrna. Smyrna, for a prime example, very difficult to get into when you have a lot of aircraft just calling Smyrna Tower from the east, bypassing our services. So we have to sequence a jet with Smyrna Tower, who's already sequencing 10 other VFR aircraft in the same pattern. So pushing this out might, I don't like to use the word force, but it might force some of the local operators to call us and then aid us in sequencing them into the Smyrna airport or more airports similar to that. Yeah.
Will, did you want to add something?
Yeah, if you don't mind. With regards to volume, we have a controller here that's a data guru. He just does very well with our numbers. He's a CFI, certified flight instructor as well, and he loves to give these little highlights for us. But the numbers he put out for February, we had 6 days in a row, we had over 1,000 operations. That's the most we've ever had in February. That's even, we had a airline hub here back in the early 90s, and we surpassed those numbers. We had 1164 last week, I think Tuesday. We've never had that in February. We broke that number on Friday, last past Friday, of 1264. That's the biggest number we've ever had in February as well. So we're projecting, if the numbers we're seeing now for the spring and the summer, projecting averaging between 1,300 and 1,400 traffic count in the TRACON daily. So with those numbers, we need this Class C extension. It's going to help primarily with the final box, which airplanes now, they can be essentially the same altitude, the final approach fix. VFR, non-participating aircraft, the same altitude as airplanes landing here at Nashville. That's a potential disaster waiting to happen. Most aircraft like to be stabilized from 5 to 8 miles stable, good speed coming in. And when you have a VFR at the final approach fix 5 miles before you land, that's very alarming. So we think this is what we need, and we'll see how it goes. And maybe further down the road, I mean, we're going to be, if the numbers we're seeing now, they increase, we're going to be the busiest level 9 class Charlie in the NAS, National Airspace System. And we're getting close to level 10 territory at that point.
It's a lot of aircraft, a lot of operations going on there. And I know you guys you want to be talking to as many of them as you can, just know exactly where they are. I can definitely see where this, where you want this. So our next question, kind of in operations, will this change how helicopters fly in the downtown area? And specifically, they're wondering if this will affect how they fly to and from the hospitals. Will, you unmuted? Would you like to speak on that one?
Yeah, I'll speak on it. There's a cutout there, as you can see on the slide, for downtown. So we did that just for the mainly the medevac aircraft, the helicopters coming in and out of downtown. We're blessed here at Nashville to have one of the premier healthcare in the world, actually, but it's one of the best in the South, in the States. Medevac Life Flight, Vanderbilt put out numbers. I think it was 2019 that came out in 2020, the year of COVID, but 2019, the Nashville area was #1 in helicopter medevac operations. So we're pretty proud of that. We see a lot of medevac helicopters in and out of Nashville area. And now since Nashville is booming, there's several touring helicopter companies as well that we have to kind of provide services for. But with the congestion with that, and also downtown tours, which that's getting pretty hectic as well, sometimes we have to say no to the downtown tours because of all the medevac helicopters, and that's fine too. We're just trying to provide a service to make sure they get there efficiently in and out as quickly as they can. And we take pride in the medevacs. We're trained from day one to treat those aircraft like our kids or parents or wives or on that helicopter airplane. So we try to get those to and fro as quickly as possible. And if we have to, we'll break off somebody on a final to get those helicopters through.
Yeah, and I know with medevac, I know we all hope we never have to use the service, but it's really comforting to know that's there, and that it's being supported to give you the quickest route to a hospital. Our next question, there was a question on whether the FAA had reviewed our letter of agreements regarding the surrounding and underlying airports. So just kind of existing letter of agreements that we might have with surrounding airports. Marie, I'll pose that question to you if you could speak on that.
Sure. So once the Class Charlie proposal is approved, the letters of agreement will be reviewed and modified as necessary to comply with the new Class Charlie changes. Currently at Nashville, we only have letters of agreement with John Tune and Smyrna Federal Contract Towers. All the other satellite airports do not have control towers nor letters of agreement with Nashville at this time.
Good to know. Thank you, Marie. I will just take a quick pause and remind everyone that if you'd like to provide any questions, if you want to submit any questions, if you registered on the Zoom platform, please submit your questions on the Q&A tab. And if you're watching via Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, you can submit your questions in that platform's chat area for us to review and discuss. So I'll go into the next question. As was kind of discussed earlier, as participant had suggested 2,400 feet floors. Do you panelists, kind of open it up to everyone, do you believe that that's a reasonable adjustment? I mean, a 2,400 foot floor. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe as Jim and Carl both spoke to raising that floor to 2,400 feet on the east side. And, as a pilot that flies in the area, I think that would be, a welcome change. I don't see any reason why we can go up a couple hundred feet. It doesn't impact how we would feed Smyrna necessarily, and it'll make it a little easier for VFR aircraft to kind of avoid those antennas or stay a little higher over the racetrack coming into Smyrna from the east. But it's definitely, all feedback from this is reviewed by the agency, and we come together. They ask for input from the controllers on the floor, and basically we would kind of run through that process and see if that's something we would consider changing. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. And I guess still it drives back to just the outcome that we're primarily looking for is increasing that safety, increasing that communication to all the aircraft, especially any non-participating VFR. Get them talking to you guys.
Absolutely. We're not trying to make, life unreasonably difficult. Some of the changes may seem that way, but, the FAA's primary focus on this whole project is safety into and out of, the 15 to 20 miles around Nashville. And if, a small change such as raising the floor a couple hundred feet on the east side would make, it a better operation for the local pilots, I don't see why we wouldn't consider, options like that.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Our next question. So is the National Class D airspace boundary being changed? So the current existing KBNA Class D airspace boundary, is that being changed during this or considered?
So Nashville has the Class Charlie, obviously. That's the only change is the Charlie. The deltas, the lateral boundaries around John Tune and Smyrna are not going to change at all. You can still, if you like, you can still go underneath us there with the east side and the west side to get into John Tune and Smyrna respectively. That's your prerogative, the VFR pilot. And the traffic pattern I think over there is 16 or 1500, so you can just ease on in the traffic pattern, talk to the towers, and get underneath. But really, the only change is the Class Charlie, just the extending out of the altitudes, the 4 altitudes, and the 6,000 feet as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question, with John Tune now underlying Class C, will they be able to receive beacon codes directly from the ground or from ground control? I'm sorry. So again, that's kind of questioning for pilots and the operators out there. Curious if they'll be able to get those beacon codes directly from ground control.
Sure, Matt, absolutely. It's right now it's we're kind of equipment locked. So the way it works is at Nashville, we have a computer that communicates with the National Airspace System, allows us to put in VFR flight following or IFR flight plans, and we generate beacon codes from that. The NAS gives us the beacon codes back. Currently, John Tune does not have a way to access that flight plan system. So if you're IFR filing off John Tune, the John Tune controllers call us at Nashville and request that we read them the flight plan, including the beacon code that we've generated when that flight plan was filed. That's how it works with IFR. We relay it back to them. The controllers at John Tune relay it to the pilots, the ones picking up the clearance. As far as VFR goes, John Tune has no way to issue to give their own codes out for that. That's something that will change as John Tune starts to get more equipment. But if you were to request flight following from John Tune from the ground, basically be the same two-way process. They would call us, we would put in a VFR flight following, we would generate a code and then relay it to them. So it's kind of like playing telephone. But in the end, yes, it is possible to get codes from John Tune, VFR flight following on the ground, but the process is identical to the way it is right now with IFR. So no changes as of yet until the equipment, their equipment issue changes.
Again, kind of speaking back to that equipment issue, but what this it's specifically speaking on is the changes to Class C and the sizing of it. So our next question is wondering, why isn't there a cutout for airspace above MQY? I believe is that Smyrna, and then such as an area E for John Tune. Kind of look to Marie if maybe you can speak to a cutout at John Tune and how that might, if there's ever been any consideration for airspace over MQY.
Well, Area A contains the cutout and was created for the downtown Nashville area, primarily for the medevac helipads and the downtown aerial activities. And it's independent of the John Tune Airport. And this is as a reminder, because I believe we covered this earlier, the Smyrna class Delta will have hierarchy over the Nashville class Charlie. So we didn't feel at this time that a cutout was necessary.
So you said that the Smyrna Class D will have hierarchy over the Class C, the proposed Class C.
Yes.
That's okay. Next question, and I know it's one that we've probably all thought to some extent. Would it make more sense to make the airspace for Nashville just go ahead and make it Class Bravo, Class B? Just push it out to the 20 nautical miles and be done with it. Almost ripping the Band-Aid off approach. Chris, I see you want to speak on this maybe.
Sure. This is a common question that I've fielded from pilot friends all over the area and attending some groups and stuff. This big question: why don't we just go to a B? Bs take time. So if you were to put a time frame on a Bravo, just give it a time frame of 3 or 4 years. Our exponential growth here, if we don't make a change now, some sort of temporary fix to try and push some of these non-participating aircraft away from the busier spots here in town, it would be a nightmare from a controller standpoint, in that we would be missing so many VFR aircraft, with an IFR trying to get into Nashville or Smyrna or Lebanon or something like that. That would almost be it would be a pretty big safety issue. So we need to take some steps in the meantime to try and get a handle on controlling the situation a little better. And cut some of our controllers some relief as far as avoiding some of these VFR aircraft. Like I said, Bravo takes time. I'm sure Marie's in that process. She's had the talks with higher ups and stuff as far as that goes. She has anything to add, but it's something that we look at. And so this is kind of a first step in the process, the long process of getting something like that done.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback what Chris said, it is a process, and we do have to try to resolve the issues that we're seeing, the safety issues at the lowest possible level without creating too much impact on the NAS. So this is the first step, and that is the Class Charlie modification.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you, Chris. So our next question, can a VFR corridor be provided from east to west over Nashville to provide traffic to move more easily from MQY to John Tune? This person notes that many low-level VFR traffic below Class C shelf fly close underneath the final approaches of Nashville to get around quickly without talking with traffic or air traffic. So I see Will. I don't know if you want to kind of speak on this one.
Yeah, I'll jump in. And that's a great question. We've talked about this before. As controllers, we try to expedite the VFRs through there now as quickly as we can, depending on the traffic. But from John Tune to Smyrna, it would be an excellent point, maybe even over BNA at a certain altitude, or just north of Nashville or south of Nashville at a certain altitude. That takes time. We have discussed it. I know Chris has actually flown in a few corridors before. He may be more knowledgeable with that than I. Chris, you want to talk about that, your experiences with the corridor and how successful they've been in other places?
They work great. Phoenix, Atlanta, bigger airports like that, they've got abilities to flow over top. And that's something that we've been talking about for years as we get busier. The biggest gripe from local pilots is, I don't want to call ATC and I want to transition, below the shelf around the core, because I want to get from point A to point B. I don't want to burn extra gas. I don't want to be vectored all over the sky. Those are common complaints we get from pilots, is I just don't want to be moved around too much. And that's fine. And, a VFR corridor would definitely solve that, would make our lives easier. The easiest place to transition somebody, the safest place, is right over top of our airport, because everybody's either departing or landing right underneath you. So we're all on board for something like that. And as soon as, our airspace, this moves forward in the process and gets approved, that'll be one of our number one priorities as controllers and pilots that work there as well, that this is something we want to see happen that would make everybody's lives easier. Yeah.
I think definitely once, we get a Class Bravo, because I think it's definitely coming years down the road, because we're just growing so quick. That's something we can maybe implement when we get to Bravo, but we try to expedite now as much as we can, east to west from John Tune to Smyrna, depending on the traffic.
Well, our next question, we've already discussed it a little bit about Class Bravo, and why not just go ahead and just jump right into it now. And it's been a point of conversation already from the last couple questions. But the question is, why, as an international airport, why is Nashville even a Class C instead of a Class Bravo already? Is it Chris?
Will, you want this?
Will, do you want to try?
You want me to take it?
You can go ahead.
Okay, cool. Well, there's a formula that goes into figuring out where, when somebody needs a Bravo, and it's basically a math formula: number of operations a year, passenger employments, things like that. What kind of equipment we have on the airport, and basically Nashville started as a Charlie, and it's taken all this time to kind of eventually develop the numbers for needing a Bravo. There would have been no sense to make it a Bravo back then, and then in our slower years, we would have been a slow Bravo. And there's several of those in the country that started as a Bravo, and the traffic is nowhere near what we have here in our Charlie. So it is something that they kind of they started with, and then they say, well, as you move forward, we'll see how it goes or how busy you get and the need for a Bravo. And then when that happens, then we start that process, and that's where we are right now.
Okay, thank you. So our next question is asking about a Brasher report. And I'm going to kind of pose this to Don. We were curious if you might be able to explain what a Brasher report is and how it's covered by the pilot's Bill of Rights.
Okay, so the Brasher report is a report that we receive from air traffic control. Typically, what happens is an aircraft, for example, deviates from its assigned altitude. Air traffic will inform the pilot that Brasher warning has been issued. The Brasher is a name that comes from an individual named Mr. Brasher, who was a pilot who had a deviation a long time ago. I believe it started in 1987. And so that's where the term Brasher comes from. But the pilot deviation, once that occurs, and it could be an occurrence for anything that caused that. Was it pilot error? Was it turbulence? Was the pilot having to deviate due to an obstacle or something? Once we receive that report, that's when we begin our investigation of it, looking at the data that I talked about earlier, the traffic, the video recordings, the radar report. And then when my team reaches out to the pilot in command, we will present them their pilot Bill of Rights, along with the privacy notice that talks about how they can communicate, or if they don't want to communicate, how we can go about handling the process. Again, we're not, the term that we say, we're not trying to be enforcers. We're not trying to come down hard on people, but what we're trying to do is, in the name of safety, have an open and honest conversation about the events so that we can learn from it and prevent it from happening again. Back to you, Matt.
No, thank you, Don. That's actually, I learned something there. I've even just in the hours that I've flown, I've never run into or heard of the Brasher report before. So that's probably a good thing from on my part, at least.
If I can add, just
please.
Anytime we have a deviation, we look at what was it? Pilot error? Was it aircraft mechanical problem? We've had people to bust airspace simply because they had a mechanical malfunction. So we looked at all parts of it, and then we make a decision. And what we try to do is work it out for the pilot's favor.
Thank you. Thanks, Don. So our next question is concerned UAV. One concern about this proposal is the increase of the 0-foot no-fly zone for LAA-NC. Will this operation affect commercial UAV pilots? So I kind of pose that, and maybe Will, I don't know if you might be able to speak on this or anyone. And from my own curiosity, I'm not quite sure what LAA-NC is.
My knowledge, there'll be no changes with the, I think it's the approved low altitude authorization notification capability, the LANC, I think is what it is, LANC, at this time at Nashville. They're really, when we have drone activity, what we do, I mean, it's more common all the time now. We get, we find out where the drone is, the color, different things about the drone, what altitude it is. We tell the supervisor. We give over the ATIS, we put it on the ATIS as well as relay it for 30 minutes, 45 minutes to the pilots. And then we quit basically talking about it. But it happens a lot now because there's more drones all the time. Marie, Chris, you want to jump in there on the drone question?
I believe the only thing that might change is like on the DJI drones or similar software where it has the ability to know how far you are from certain airports or what airspace you lie in. It may affect where you get approval to fly that drone. You still have to go through like the FAA's drone zone or land to get approval for stuff like that. But it may impact the ability to get approved based on how close you are or actually inside the core of the Charlie. I'm not exactly sure. Don't quote me on it, whether or not it's going to approve or disapprove. I'm just saying it might change. We don't have any 107, current 107 operators that work in Nashville to kind of handle something like that. So when we get an authorization, it's done through the FAA, and we get notification of when and where the drone will be flying, and we kind of broadcast that to pilots. That there may be some low altitude drone operations, within the vicinity of X airport or whatever. But our operations won't change. And the approval process may not change even with the airspace change. But at this time, I'm just not sure.
And just to kind of clarify for anyone listening in, I had posed the question and said UAV is an unmanned air vehicle.
Yeah,
we keep using the terms drones is more of a colloquial term that many will use. But just to explain what that UAV was. Again, all great questions. Please, as people, as you're joining us and listening in, please continue to submit them. Just kind of gives us an opportunity to discuss amongst the panel here and feel it out. Our next question from a pilot based at Lebanon. Air traffic in this area does a great job. They feel that their tower is doing a great job. And they heard a comment about additional staffing for Nashville approach, which they are strongly agree with and feel it should be considered. Will there be any additional radio frequencies to reduce congestion on the existing ones? Marie, you can kind of speak to it. I think I know what the official answer be, at least for this.
Sure. Before even getting to this class Charlie modification stage to try to mitigate the volume and complexity that we're experiencing, the first thing we did was look in-house. How can we mitigate this traffic and provide more safety and efficiency for our users? That's all of our users. We have since we've kind of reactivated 2 positions that are kind of left over from the hub days, but we reconfigured the airspace to try to meet our needs. So to try to break down the frequency congestion, as Chris mentioned, it's like if you're requesting VFR services and the frequency is just overwhelmed and you're not able to get a word in edgewise, what are you going to do, right? So we're trying to open more positions to reduce the frequency congestion so those pilots can get a word in edgewise and that we can provide them services. So we're always looking, we're thinking about even opening up more positions, just to give controllers an extra set of eyes to see traffic, to be there to assist. But right now, the way our class 9 is, our level 9 air traffic facility is, according to FAA, we are currently fully staffed, right? And by opening and creating these new positions, obviously at some point we're going to need the bodies to fill those positions. But as of right now, we are fully staffed, but we are looking in-house to do anything we can to be able to provide a better service to everyone.
And the next question, it kind of feeds into that same discussion. And it was just, the question they wanted to convey that they believe that the additional sectors are a good idea and that they're glad to hear about it. And they're curious if additional staffing is being considered to accommodate the expected increase in airspace access requests from VFR aircraft. I don't know if you wanted to add any more from what you just said.
Well, with the positions that we currently have, we are sufficiently staffed to handle the current anticipated traffic associated with the airspace modification. So the airspace should, the airspace will increase safety and efficiency for all of our users.
And again, I know we've said it numerous times before, but it's all about trying to get people talking to air traffic, just getting them conversing with our controllers and making this a safer area, a safer airspace. So our next question, are these changes to Nashville's Class C a precursor to an eventual change to Class Bravo airspace? We've kind of spoken quite a bit on that already tonight. I don't know if Marie or anyone else wants to add anything more to that.
Well, at this time, there are no plans to create a Class Bravo at Nashville. Really, we're just trying to see if these Class C modifications will meet the needs to deal with the increased volume and complexity. But I'm sure as the volume and complexity has statistically been increasing, if Nashville meets the requirements for a Class Bravo at some point, the FAA will review the airspace as a possible Class B candidate. But right now, we're just in the Class C modification process.
Thank you. And again, I'm gonna kind of relay to everyone that as you're joining us, if you have any questions that you want to submit, maybe not more on if we're going to go to Class B or Bravo, but please, you can submit it via the Zoom platform in the questions and answer tab, or if you're watching via Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, you can submit your questions in the platform's chat areas. I'll go ahead and move on to the next question. And
I want to jump in there for a moment,
Yeah,
if you don't mind. Aviation is a dynamic industry. Things change very often and pretty frequently, the speed of aircraft. I mean, I talked about the numbers earlier, and with the numbers we have going now, I think we're the number 2 busiest level 9 facility, Class Charlie facility in the nation. If we keep growing the way we're growing, I see a level 10 on the horizon sooner or later. I think level 10s, most level 10s are Class Bravos. We haven't really discussed a Bravo moving that direction yet, but the Class C extension is just one of the first steps that one takes to get there. But like Marie said, we'll cross that bridge when we do get there, when the numbers dictate to have a Bravo. And Chris spoke on this several questions ago about we're busier now than some Class Bravos, level 10, Class Bravo airspaces now, i.e. Memphis. When Memphis had a couple of hubs there, FedEx, they're the busiest airport in the world at midnight. And they have a Bravo, and we're busier than they are now. So that's just an example of it takes time. You know how FAA, the government, it just takes time. It's the way it is to get these numbers, to get the airspace drawn up. But it could change, and it could change in months, years. We don't know yet. So just bear with us, and we'll try to do the best we can to provide the service.
thank you, Will. So our next question is in regards to the inner ring of the Class C and what was shown. This person asks, the inner ring of the Class C, will it remain in the same position for the city? They have done some city tours, and they feel that it may facilitate easier flows around the city if it orbits around the city on the east side, if that's possible. Chris, I see you're unmuted. If maybe you want to speak on this one.
Sure, I assume east side of the city, he means closer to Nashville. So as you can see on the cutout here, the original airspace basically follows a contour where that cutout is, so about a 5-mile radius around Nashville. Right now, we have several tour operators, mostly to John Tune, and a lot of the live flight helicopters that choose not to talk to us, or they're flight following internally with their company. They'll use this cutout of this new airspace to basically transition around the requirement to talk to us as they make it into downtown. So that was the whole point of leaving that the way it was for our multitude of helicopter operators that flight follow with somebody else, not have a requirement to try and work 2 radios at the same time, while operating with patients on board that are critical and things like that. Right now, as it stands, kind of a peek behind the curtain, Nashville Tower, the tower controllers handle most of the traffic over downtown. So sightseeing, they provide the radar services. Sometimes it's crazy. You can look up and see 7 or 8 people, doing downtown tours, especially around holidays or Valentine's Day, with their significant other, things like that. They provide the services over downtown. And I can't think, unless we're operating on a straight 1-3 operation with really weird winds, or a straight 3-1 where we're departing towards downtown, we almost 100% of the time just approve those operators over that area. So the cutout is to help those that don't want to talk to us. And we'll still provide the same services we do now, as far as flight following over downtown for requested tours. So there's no, to address the basic question, there's no changes to move the core of the Charlie away from Nashville, like to offset it to the east or anything like that. I understand having more room where you didn't have to talk to us would make it easier to circle east when you're doing your tours, but at this time, there's no plans to move it.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Our next question regarding the surrounding Class E areas. Will the surrounding Class E areas from 700 feet AGL, from actual ground level, 700 feet, be modified along with the Class C, what we're presenting tonight? Maria, I see you unmuted. Can you speak on this?
Sure. Yeah, there are no changes planned for Class Echo airspace in conjunction with this Class Charlie modification proposal. So right now there's no plans to change the Class Echo.
Okay, thank you. So with everything, we've talked about tonight so far, like we do have one question. Just curious, to Chris, Will, Marie, do the air traffic controllers support this proposal?
Yeah, absolutely would be the easy answer. I kind of touched on earlier, but as controllers, we hate change. We hate anything that changes. So for us to kind of come, 100% behind a project that would increase the safety and make, the pilots' lives much safer, and everybody can get home to their families, and the controllers aren't sweating about missing 500 airplanes at a time. This is something that's pretty serious to us, and we've been pushing for this for a long time. And as a facility, I can guarantee we're 100% behind this, both pilots and controllers alike. That's the easy answer.
Thank you, Chris. So we do have a question, just one that I'll pose towards Chuck, specifically about aircraft and if they're getting louder or quieter, and how we might interact with that. Chuck, could you speak on that, please?
Okay. All new aircraft are more efficient and quiet. The FAA's Office of Environment and Energy has worked with air carriers and manufacturers for over 50 years to try to reduce noise at the source, the aircraft engine. Okay, you say, well, how do you do that? Manufacturers are using the acoustical liners in engines to reduce noise. They're equipping engines with mixers and chevrons to reduce the exhaust that comes from the engine that creates turbulence, that creates noise. There are operational changes, such as change of times for runway use, for things like night ops, change of procedures to try to route traffic over, less sensitive areas, less populated areas, that type of thing. Use of flap edge noise reduction fins to reduce the noise generated when aircraft put their flaps down. So those steps and just a lot of other changes that the FAA has been instrumental in working with manufacturers and air carriers to try to reduce that noise. Now, if you want more information, you can look at FAA.gov and search FAA Office of Environment and Energy.
Thank you, Chuck. So our next question is specific to Murfreesboro Airport. And this person's asking if there's any intent to make Murfreesboro Airport a controlled airport. Will, I don't know if you can speak on that.
Sure, I'd be glad to, man. I fly to Murfreesboro, so I know it is busy. There's no plans at this time to make it a controlled field. There's several flight schools there. I know of two. There may be more, but I know two mainly, MTSU and Murfreesboro Aviation. And there's a lot of flight training going on, and they have a new FBO, and it's super nice. They're doing a great job there. There's a lot more jet traffic in and out of Murfreesboro as well. Chris kind of alluded to it a couple of questions ago, how it is to have 10 to 13 aircraft in the pattern. You have a jet coming in. I mean, double their speed, triple their speed. It's hectic. It's very hectic, and without ADS-B, it would be almost impossible at this point. But to my knowledge, there's not any talks about having a tower. I think it would be at some point a good thing. I don't know if the viewers heard that MTSU is heading down to Shelby Village. That will help. That would be a couple of years from now, but that will help with the congestion and might alleviate some of the issues of all the traffic there at Murfreesboro. But as of now, there's no talks to get a tower, a Class Delta there.
Thank you, Will. It's an interesting point of view, just because you as the operator, you help in the operation of the airspace, but you're also using it. You're getting up there, flying it yourself. It's part of your community up there. Our next
With,
que- Go ahead.
with that, I want to kind of add on that. We have actually several pilots here at the approach now. Chris is a CFI, certified flight instructor. We have numerous other CFIs as well, and a bunch of commercial pilots. One of the questions earlier that somebody posed was, are we going out? The AOPA guy talked about, do we go out to have outreach? We actually do. We do quite a bit, I think. Chris, another CFI, went out to an IMC meeting about a month ago, I think, and had the question and answer, and kind of we're trying to educate the public. We care about the flying public. We care about the general aviation pilots. They're some of our biggest users. So we fly in general aviation, so we want everybody to know what we're doing and kind of be ahead of the problem before it actually is implemented. So we do care. We have hopefully more outreach going out, and before it actually hits the floor, which it could be within I don't know, up to a year before this goes live. I don't know what it is, 6 months to a year, probably. It takes some time, but we are getting out there and trying to educate folks in the world in the airspace.
No, thank you for that, Will. So our next question is from an operator from Pilot who says they're flying out of Smyrna, primarily VFR. They do want to convey that they felt the presentation gave a good rationale for raising Class C ceiling over Smyrna. But there's still a question about the rationale on lowering the ceiling to 2,100 feet. Kind of looking through it, they further just discuss lowering the ceiling to VFR traffic departing Smyrna. They feel that it won't improve the safety, but it will detract from by encouraging aircraft to stay low, especially when departing from the east, to avoid from talking in Nashville. I mean, I guess the question in here, and what, when we look to Chris, Will, and everyone to kind of discuss, this is one of the questions is going to be if operators are wanting to fly, from this change or wanting to fly underneath the shelf. Can you speak to the kind of that operation and our take on it?
Sure, absolutely. It's kind of pick apart. It's a longer question, but the 2,100 is basically just kind of a copy and paste from our current airspace. So they took the shelf and they just pushed out another 5 miles. So I doubt, without knowing behind the scenes from our point of view, that anything was looked at other than let's just extend it out and keep the 2,100 the same. With the feedback we've got, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to open up discussion, especially the multiple feedback tonight about raising that shelf to 24 and some really good reasons presented for doing so. But there, as long as it didn't impact, what we were working on that east side of the airport, and off the top of my head, I can't think of any issues where it'd be, and it would make getting into Smyrna, in and out of Smyrna, a lot easier, especially those of you that try and cut under the shelf, to go in there if it was extended out there at 21. There are some antennas out there. There's a lot of aircraft that would be compressed into a small airspace. So there's some very valid points for doing that. But other than that, yeah, I mean, we're taking the feedback from this into account, and any changes that make sense will probably get pushed through pretty good. So
next question, long question short, why not redesign the aircraft around the actual approaches? This participant feels that the main reason is to protect the approach corridors down to 4,000 feet, the final approach corridor from 4,000 to 2,000, and the north to south transition areas between 4,000 and 6,000. They feel that the ceilings of 2,400 and 2,100 seem a little like an old operation where the inner circle was too small to protect the final approach fix. So I'll kind of put that out for anyone to kind of discuss, or if I can pose it to Marie, if you can speak on why the redesign isn't really centered around the actual approaches.
Sure. So when we were looking at this Class Charlie modification, we really tried to focus in on what areas we are really trying to protect. So we do have the north corridor down to 1,800 feet, south corridor down to 1,800 feet. That was primarily to keep aircraft from flying under the final, as our users are in critical phases of flight, coming in and out of the airport. Another thing we've seen is a great increase in TCAS RAs with our commercial aircraft, with these unidentified VFR aircraft that aren't talking to us. Usually TCASs, it's kind of air carriers specific as to what the sensitivity is that they're set on. Sometimes it's 600 feet. So even our usual air traffic, 500 feet, will still set a TCAS RA off, a resolution advisory that the pilot gets in his cockpit that tells him to climb, descend, those type things to deconflict from the unidentified traffic that we're not talking to. So we've seen TCAS RAs, those resolution advisories, occur with our inbound aircraft from the south, with aircraft that are climbing off of Smyrna, usually the ones that are south to southeast bound. As soon as they clear our current 10-mile shelf, they just start, climbing at an exponential rate, which unfortunately happens to be into some of our inbound aircraft. So we definitely looked at all that, and we appreciate all the feedback, because we will definitely review the outer ring floors from what we've gotten in this meeting, as well as other comments in the areas C and E. Chris, do you have something to add?
Yeah, kind of just talking to those that teach in the area, or those that are students. I know we have a lot of people listening that are probably one or the other at one point. Moving our primary concern was the finals at Nashville, like you said. The other concern was the volume of traffic sort of hanging out in the vicinities east of like Smyrna. That's a common practice area. And if you've ever given flight instruction or taken flight instruction, it's expensive. So the instructors and the students want to get out of that airport like Smyrna, get to the east, get a good distance away, and then do their maneuvers and get back, without having to fly a whole bunch of distance between point A and B. And that's just money wasted. So a lot of the guys off Murfreesboro, Smyrna and Lebanon and Gallatin, they'll all take off and they'll stay within, 10 miles of the airport. And we transit as air traffic, we are primarily responsible for not only the flow into Nashville, but also the IFR sequencing into Smyrna, and also VFR sequencing into Smyrna and Murfreesboro and Lebanon, all those guys on the east side. So it makes our job harder to miss all those loitering, flight instruction students, or somebody sightseeing or flying over their house or something. So the goal with pushing those shelves out was basically create an artificial buffer and move everybody just a little bit farther away. So it's easier for us to run those IFR and VFR that we have to sequence into the airport without pushing them 10 or 15 miles east of the field they're trying to land at, just to get around all the 1,200 codes. But that was the primary reason for kind of pushing it east and west.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from an operator. They note that they're flying out of Music City Executive, and they want to make a statement that turning west off the runway 17 will now be significant. There will now be significantly less time before you enter the Class Charlie airspace. They're curious. Their question is there a mechanism to connect with air traffic before taking off when their VFR to get their squawk code? Chris?
Yeah, sure. That's my home turf. Gallatin is where I do the majority of my flying and instruction at the airport. So very familiar with how close the outer ring will push to the southwest part of the airport. If you've ever used flight service, if you ever fly a VFR flight plan, we're kind of getting away from that now, not to knock flight service, but if you follow flight plan flight service, ATC does not know. We don't have a code on you. We don't have a flight plan on you. We have none of your information without actually calling flight service and saying, hey, does this guy have a flight plan on file? We don't do that. So an easy way to get a code on the ground if you wanted advanced flight following is Gallatin has a GCO or a ground communications outlet. Sometimes the reception can be spotty, but there is a recorded phone number that you can call that's listed in the AFD. You can call us, say, hey, I'm looking for flight following. My course is a 270. It's going to take me right in the Charlie. I'm looking to go 4,500 to McKellar and go get some lunch or something. That's easy for us to do. We'll give you a code just like we do our IFR guys. You come off the airport, you get handling, and you don't have the stress of trying to call us before you enter the Charlie. I know sometimes if you're a new pilot or a student pilot, that's added stress of I have a lot of stuff to do while flying the airplane and worry about where I'm at. But we'd be glad to help you if you use the ground method for that. So easy answer.
You make it sound easy though. But again, that's because, like you said, that's your backyard. That's where you're flying a lot in and out. You're already, you know what you're having to deal with there. So our next question, and I guess before I jump into the question, I will also kind of remind everybody that's still watching, all of this is being recorded. So I know there's a lot of information. There's a lot of questions going about. These recordings will be available for you to watch, just to kind of, if you want to go back and listen again and catch up on any of that information. Our next question, well, I guess it speaks to if there's time frame for implementation of this Class C modification. If anyone can speak on what we might be looking at time frame wise.
To my knowledge, I've kind of hit on this before. It takes a little while, the rulemaking, the implementation phases. Marie probably could hit on this better than I can, but I would guess a couple of years, maybe 1 year minimum, up to 2 years is my best guess. Marie, do you have anything on that, the management side of it?
You have it about right. It's, I mean, it can be 6 months to 2 years, and 6 months is being a little optimistic, but it can take for anywhere from 6 months to 2 years after this meeting.
Okay, thank you. So our next question notes that, has been discussed throughout this meeting, the rather large training area east of Nashville and Middle Tennessee State University, especially with all the flight schools in the area. The question is, will the proposed increase in airspace cause any change in the letter to airmen with regard to supporting practice approaches? I don't know if that's been considered or if you can speak on that in any way. I see Marie, you've unmuted.
Yeah, the proposed Class Charlie modification will have no impact on the letter to airmen. That allows us to provide practice approach services and separation to VFR aircraft. It actually will help us to better provide those services. So before, the letter to airmen required us to facilitate practice approaches to VFR aircraft, which increased our workload. While we're trying to miss these aircraft with all the VFR aircraft that are not participating. So this airspace modification should allow us to provide better services to those aircraft that are participating under the letter to airmen for practice approaches.
Perfect, thank you. On the next question, throughout the presentation, throughout the discussion tonight, you guys have all mentioned level 9 and level 10 for Nashville. There's a question exactly if maybe we could discuss just a little bit about exactly what does level 9 or level 10 mean. I was hoping, Marie, I guess if
Sure.
you can tackle that one.
Yeah. I'll start on this one. If anybody else has anything, go free. So the Federal Aviation Administration ranks their air traffic facilities from a level, say, from 4 to 12, right? And it's based on the traffic volume and complexity. So, like Memphis Center is a level 12. Nashville currently is a level 9. And as Chris mentioned, there's a lot of numbers and formulas that go into when can a level 9 move to a level 10, right? So again, it's just the higher the complexity and the volume, the higher the level of the facility. Another thing that plays into that is also the number of controllers allotted to that facility. So as you grow in levels, I believe that you are allotted more controllers, so our staffing would also improve.
Okay, thank you. So our next question, just regarding accessing John C. Toon and Smyrna. They're curious can John C. Toon and Smyrna be accessed without getting into the Class C airspace with this proposal? Chris, I see, maybe if you can talk on that.
Yeah, so you can see the shelf on the west side. We'll talk to John Toon first, since that's the easier one. You can see the shelf's 2,400 feet. So obviously you would have to, if you didn't want to call Nashville to transition. It would be, depending on where you're coming from, it's a really quick transition. You would get handed off, by us to John 2 Tower pretty quick, if you're only going to fly 2 or 3 miles through there. But you can just descend, don't be at 2,400 feet when you're in the Charlie. So you can come across at 23. Somebody mentioned earlier, one of our speakers talked about personal buffers. That's something that all pilots kind of, we don't want to be deviated. We don't want to get a brush or warning. We don't want to talk to FSDO, no offense. But we're going to give a buffer. So, 2,200 feet, 2,100 feet, something to allow for, we have a wrong altimeter setting or something like that, where we might be off 100 feet or so. So on John 2 to the west side, absolutely. You can get, just stay under the shelf, call John 2 Tower directly. As you can see, they're at, or, they're at, not to include 2,400 feet on that airspace. So just tuck into the shelf, call John 2 directly. I believe their pattern's 1,500 feet. So you've got a pretty good buffer to stay safe. I know some of the terrain out west of John 2 is a little bit higher than on the east side of our airport. But there's ways to stay safe out there. There are a bunch more antennas too. Talking to Smyrna, the 2,100 foot, we've addressed that tonight several times about raising that to 2,400, but as it stands, you would have to tuck down below 2,100 feet on the east side to get to Smyrna, or approach Smyrna, because they do have hierarchy over our airspace. Just approach Smyrna from the southeast would probably be the easiest to just avoid the Charlie altogether. But sometimes, you don't want to maneuver out of your way to get down there. But it just depends. The rules are the same. Don't fly in the Charlie without talking to us. There are several ways, with the shelving that we have to get in and out of the airports. Obviously, the east side is lower, but yeah.
Thank you, Chris. So for our next question, and I know it's been discussed a handful of times throughout tonight, from about outreach, about education, about giving opportunity and kind of educating the public. So the question is, what education will be given to the local pilots on how to navigate the new Class C? Marie, if you could speak on that.
Mm-hmm. So the Federal Aviation Administration, we want all the pilots to have the tools necessary to safely navigate within the NAS. And we're going to take efforts during the implementation phase to advertise the change, as well as educate pilots, and doing more outreach just to kind of get the feedback on how we can all work together to make the NAS safer and more efficient for all the users. So of course, we definitely would want to engage in those conversations, as well as education and outreach.
I can add.
Please do, Don.
Okay, so every one of the inspectors that are pilots in the FSDO are totally approachable. If the public has got questions about navigation in addition to what's already out there, all you got to do is call. We also have what we call a FAA safety team, or you might know them as the FAST team. You reach out and they will answer your questions to help with guiding you around the airspace.
Thank you. So, and this kind of feeds into the next question. There's a question roughly that, if there's proper pilot education, would it make a difference so that there isn't a need to expand the class, Nashville's airspace into Class Charlie? Can anyone, I guess, Marie or Chris?
Hey, Chris, I think you're the best one to answer this one.
It would, well, let's say historically, we've been trying to outreach for the last 3 or 4 years. It's slowed down due to COVID and trying to, meet with large groups, but it's starting to pick back up again. I've talked to Death about how the, techniques to avoid the Charlie, techniques to not, where Nashville's airplanes are flying. My students or other instructors, reach out and say, we're trying to transition at this point. Where are we unsafe at? And a lot of the times it's because they don't know which way we're landing or departing. So we go out and encourage, hey, pay attention to what Nashville's doing and you'll know the safer spots to be. And unfortunately, it's legal to skirt the Charlie. It's legal and people do it every day and there's nothing we can do about it. Is it a safety issue sometimes? Absolutely. There's sometimes where the pilot gets lucky and we don't have any arrivals or departures and then they just transition and, they're completely safe. But outreach will happen and it has to happen. So as this change goes out, I encourage, we have a great Middle Tennessee Aviation is such a close-knit community. And there's so many Facebook groups and pilot programs. There's like 3 groups meeting tonight, as a matter of fact, that were kind of co-scheduled with this. But their job is to, how do we be safe? That's everybody's job is they want to fly and have fun and come home. And part of that is kind of working together with us. And I encourage, there's so many people in this area that have my phone number. If you have a question about something, I'd be more than happy to answer anything you because the more people know, the safer they are. Before you may transition across and script the Charlie and not realize what you're doing, it takes one 5-minute conversation to say, hey, this is why you're in a bad spot. Are you legal? Yes. Is it safe for everybody? Probably not most of the time. So it will continue, and we're going to get better as we get out of this pandemic stuff and we can start meeting again. I foresee a pretty big outreach program from our side of the house, more towards the local community as this airspace starts to roll out.
So kind of continuing on that with this proposal, will it allow aircraft to fly closer together with the proposed change to Class C?
No, the rules don't change. Our standard separation rules have been the same for quite a while. We have a set lateral and vertical separation we have to have between IFR to IFR. We talked about that earlier, or VFR to VFR, or mixed company. So the procedures will not change. Our radar procedures won't change. The aircraft will not be flying any closer together than they do now, because that's sort of set based on our airport configuration. So how close our runways are together really sets the standard that we have, and that's not going to change until the FAA comes together and says we're going to make a major rule change. And I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Thank you. So I guess looking at we have one last question for tonight. For everything that we've discussed tonight, and all that we've gone over, one of the biggest questions is how do we know that this proposal will be safe? I know that's a big question, but if we can, if I could pose that to Marie or Chris, how do we know for what's being proposed here that it will be safe?
Marie, you want to go?
Sure, I'll start, but I know that you'll probably have something to add. So just in developing this airspace, our number one objective was increasing safety, not only to the users that we currently talk to, but also trying to expand that to the users that we also don't talk to right now. So by just having those aircraft having to call us to be able to verify their mode C altitude readouts, to be able to give good traffic advisories to both VFR and IFR aircraft, our number one here is safety, right? All the procedures are put through a rigorous safety review. And we also looked at other Class Charlies in the NAS with a similar airport and traffic makeup to try to figure out where we needed to make those modifications. Chris, do you have something?
Sorry, mine was more, that was a very good answer. That's more technical than I was going to get. Just from the pilot side of things, a good example is when you're flying around. I always feel safer. There's times where I'll fly and I won't talk to ATC because I'm doing something local. I know the area. I know the east side's usually busy or the west side's busy today. I have enough situation awareness to kind of know, when to call, when it's important to call, and when I feel that it's safe to call and do so. But think about this: you're flying your airplane around and you're relying on ADS-B. That's a big popular thing. So use apps for pilots like ForeFlight or Garmin Pro or things like that, where they will show traffic, or avionics that actually show ADS-B targets. What they don't show is when that aircraft does not have ADS-B. And the only thing that would save you from hitting that aircraft that you don't see would be a controller that actually has a primary radar return on that airplane with a mode C altitude that we don't know is accurate, but at least we can tell you, hey, there's somebody out there that's driving right at you. We suggest you do this, or we suggest you do that. There's a fear of talking to ATC. That's a big thing in the local communities, especially with new pilots, even the older ones that grew up not talking to ATC at all, flying out in the sticks somewhere where they didn't have controlled airspace. We want to kind of demystify that and make it, we're people. We work for the FAA, we're people, we have a job to do. We have to be the professionals. You on the pilot side, unless you're flying for Southwest or United or, where you're a professional pilot, phraseology is not, you don't have to be a stickler for it. You don't have to be afraid to call us and ask us a question or get services from us. And we deal with pilots from every spectrum, from those that don't, barely speak English, from another country that are flight training here, to brand new people on the radio, to, expert 10,000, 20,000 hour pilots. So we've seen it all. We know how to tailor our delivery and kind of our services and what we do. We can handhold if need be, and there's no problem with that. Everybody has to learn some way. But you are safer talking to us with a set of eyes on you than if you were on your own. That's the bottom line. Whether you choose, you might get vectored 15 or 20 miles out of your way. That's the cost of being safe. that's your option if you want to use our service or not. But we're here if you want to reach out, and we encourage you to do so.
Thank you, Chris. And so, I mean, that concludes the Q&A portion of tonight's meeting. I'd like to say thank you to all our panelists and to everyone who's attended this Nashville Informal Airspace Workshop. A recording of this event will be available on the FAA's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube channels. The FAA appreciates your time and participation in the design of the National Class C airspace, and we encourage you to send your comments. All formal comments received during the comment period will be considered prior to any revision or issuance of a notice of proposed rulemaking for this airspace. This concludes our meeting, and thank you and have a good night.